This is a tremendous opportunity for folks who don't work with tribal entities on a regular basis to, I'll speak in the mic here, to actually understand what challenges, difficulties, and techniques and strategies the tribes really do on a daily basis. As Governor Chavarria mentioned, our staff works day in and out through thick and thin, snow and rain. There is no off day just because the weather isn't good. Our guys have the perseverance of any team that I've come across. It's almost like they're a special operations crew that just excels on a day-to-day basis. We all have our challenges and our inefficient moments, but the fact that these guys just continue to push and innovate and then share this knowledge, which is tremendous, and why we're all here. Santa Clara Pueblo, as Governor Chavarria highlighted, has really emerged as a leader in fire recovery and post-fire mitigation, not just tribally, but nationally. FEMA, the EPA, BOR, all these federal agencies continually come to Santa Clara and highlight our case studies and our experience here. And as Governor says, it is for the people of Santa Clara, but it's also for our Mother Earth. It's for the environment. It's for what sustains all of us. And these lessons aren't learned just by Santa Clara to benefit Santa Clara, but now it's our turn to be able to share those lessons and share that knowledge, and that's why we are here. And that really leads us to the first objective that we have for this workshop, and it's not really to be a workshop, but a knowledge exchange forum. We're all experts in our own field. As Governor says, we all have a talent the Creator's provided us and put us in this room together. Please speak up, please share your experiences. We're here to share ours and help teach you, but you have stuff that can help us, and that's where Santa Clara has really leveraged that partnerships and collaboration and leveraging that expertise and taking what knowledge people have and understanding and listening to what they say, whether we agree with it or not. You know, that's up for debate. But what we do is see what's applicable, what can help, what will work here? What have they done over there that can work here? And what have we done here that can help you all back home in your respective lands? Secondly, really we want to gain insights into how tribes manage their resources. Our tribes are the original stewards of the land. Cumulatively, they're the third largest landowner in the United States. Massive amounts, expanses of land. I'm working with fish passage projects in the Columbia River Basin right now. And 4 tribes up there own over 50% of the salmon streams in that area. Not own, but manage those resources. Just to show the impact on a landscape scale and why we approach these efforts in restoration, not just at the site level, but with that landscape focus in mind. You're not just putting a Band-Aid on one spot, but we're trying to piece to a larger picture. And we hope to illustrate that today, or this week, with the Santa Clara watershed and how all of our projects tie into one another. There is no standalone grant that just worked to restore riparian areas or to mitigate sediment or to mulch and masticate fire debris in the upper watershed. They all tie in one together, and that's one of the things I think is really important to acknowledge with Santa Clara, and what I was impressed when I came here in 2016 at how efficient the tribe is able to tie those pieces together from the site level to the federal legislation level in DC. So commend the tribe for that. Governor mentioned the 3 fires that have come through since 1998 and decimated 80% of the tribe's forests. That blue fire in 2011 was the Las Conchas fire. At the time was the state's largest fire in history. It's now, I think, 3rd or 4th after last summer. But just to show that even in the last 10 years, that this theme of these extensive droughts and sometimes referred to as mega fire, this wasn't a one-off occurrence. This is occurring almost on an annual basis now. It does result from a number of factors, including suppression over the last 100 years, but also this drying and warming climate we're experiencing. And so we're really showing how Santa Clara has been, one, impacted by these climate disasters or climate disturbances, but then also how we're striving to be more resilient, and what can we do now so when this forest grows back and burns again in 200 or 300 years, that the community isn't faced with $200 million in infrastructure damage and having to rebuild from scratch. So really trying to tie in and work with the natural systems, and that comes back to the theme we have also of really working with nature-based solutions and integrating indigenous knowledge, and really trying to maximize the value of these ecosystems to work with them rather than trying to work against them. Just the debris flows themselves received 5 presidential disaster declarations from 2011 through 2014. 2 of those were the first tribal declarations in FEMA Region 6. These events were almost more destructive than the fires themselves. You can see in our theme picture in the upper left there, the recreational cabins. At the very top, there is actually a sediment retention basin there. You can see the dam that actually filled with and exceeded the capacity with sediment, overtopped, wiped out the recreation structures downstream, and deposited just infinite amounts of sediment and woody debris throughout the canyon. This still poses a current risk. That image in the upper right with the red outlines was a geologic assessment that was done in 2019. They still estimate 3 to 4 million cubic yards of sediment are poised on those 3 tributaries alone that could come down with a big precipitation event that isn't uncommon. Last August, we had a 1 3/4 inch event in 45 minutes. Fortunately, it was downstream of this. And the impacts we'll see tomorrow when we go up to the canyon. But we were lucky that it didn't hit this area where there's 40-foot incisions that are still exposed up there and create an enormous risk. I just want to conclude that the last 17 of the last 22 years, the Santa Clara Canyon has been closed to the community, to the tribal members. This area has been off limits due to these hazards that persist up there. And what this is translated to is a huge cultural disconnect that we're going on almost a second generation now of youth who've not been exposed to this canyon other than the stories from their grandparents and their parents and hearing about it, and hearing myself even coming in 2016 about how much reverence and high regard this area had, not just for the tribal people, but for the people in New Mexico and the surrounding regions who would come here annually for camping and fishing. This is one of the few tribal areas that was open for recreation. It was a huge source of identity for Santa Clara in the public's eye, from the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos and people coming to recreate then, and all the way through 2000. But once that canyon closed, all of a sudden, kids aren't able to go fishing, they're not hunting, they're playing games, and they're doing, succumbing to the pressures that society brings. And it was illustrated a couple years ago when I asked Governor one weekend if him and his grandson wanted to come fishing with us. And he looked at me and says, "Where? I wouldn't even know where to go." And that hit me that, wow, he's like, as he said, he says, "I've never had to go anywhere else. We had the best fishing right here. Now we don't know where to try and find a new area." And here's the tribal leader and somebody who's dealt with this day in and day out, and he doesn't have that resource to show his grandson. So it really shows the importance of what we're trying to do. And yes, we're trying to put fish back in the stream that we had 100% fish kill in, but we're also trying to do it for the cultural ties back to this landscape. We do a lot of youth integration. We have a forestry youth crew that's supported by a tribal organization. We do outreach with our community schools of all levels, from kindergarten through high school and prep schools. And we leverage that volunteer experience, and we'll talk about that more. A naturalistic approach to restoring the watershed. And in that particular term, I commend and credit Governor Chavarria on that. In 2018, we put together a poster for an EPA competition that we ended up winning for outstanding green infrastructure and low impact design. And that's really what made us realize we are doing something unique and we are doing something credible here. I think we competed against the city of Dallas and Fort Worth, Toyota North American headquarters and their rainwater catchment systems, and these corporate teams presenting that. We were just like, what are we doing here? And we ended up winning it. And it was like, okay, we're doing something right. And so let's build on that. And what we did, we didn't know a lot of these terms at the time. We were just doing it. It didn't matter. We weren't looking for credit. We were looking at really restoring the system. And we did that firstly with incorporating the knowledge of our crews and the people of the community. They talked about what the canyon was like and how impactful it was for their upbringing and their spiritual well-being. And what was it that was important? Was it the recreation? Was it the vibrance of the ecosystems? It was all of that. That translates to more increased cultural value. And also looking at how the indigenous use of fire on the landscape was used around Puye to facilitate some of the agricultural practices or medicinal plant gathering. In our 2017 HFR, hazardous fuel reduction burns, we did about 2,700 acres around Puye, which we'll look at this afternoon. Within 2 years, Daniel had community members coming back and talking about how they're finding medicinal plants they hadn't seen anywhere in the Pueblo for over 30 years. New plants that were coming back with fire. So that's just more ammo for our arsenal to go after more prescribed fire and to use that fire on the landscape, but also acknowledging that that's what the people used to do and how we need to make sure we keep doing that. So using that indigenous knowledge or indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, as it was referred to a year or two ago, but now we're just calling it indigenous knowledge at the federal level. And then again, nature-based solutions and process-based restoration, looking at what's occurring on the landscape, what's the value of a floodplain, how is an alluvial fan acting to actually capture sediment before it even reaches the stream, recognizing those processes and then trying to replicate and emulate those moving forward. This naturalistic approach really looks at, it started from prioritizing the creek, which is central to the value system of the Santa Clara people, and how can we adapt our infrastructure to the stream. When we had that FEMA grant for flood mitigation and creek restoration, the first thing the engineers went, okay, we're gonna move the creek over here and we're gonna do this so we can put the road here and the bridge here. And we said, no, and let's take a step back. This creek, the more natural this thing can flow, the higher the water quality, the more natural materials are in it, the more, the higher the value of that system will be to the people and also to the ecology. So let's step back and reprioritize. The stream is first, and then we'll make the road and the bridge adapt to it. With that, we also wanted to increase resilience. I mentioned we don't want to have to go through this in 200 or 300 years. Hopefully, when you learn a lot of these structures, the lifespan doesn't go that far, but some cases it does. And when you build nature-based solutions and you rely on those natural features and processes, you can create that resilience. Again, reconnecting the people to the landscape, and then integrating this indigenous knowledge, nature-based solutions, and process-based restoration. What we find is a lot of them are overlap and are synonymous. PBR focuses on restoring the physical processes that sustain primarily for river and floodplain ecosystems. We see this across the landscape, how massive the scale of degradation is. They say over 60% of streams in New Mexico are impaired in a poor state, and then another 20 to 30% in fair. That leaves very few that are actually in a healthy state. So here in Santa Clara Creek, we have this, we like to describe as a blank canvas, if you will. This area's been burned, it's been flooded, it's been degraded to every natural extent possible, but it also creates an opportunity for renewal. And that's the one thing I try to bring from my outside perspective as a non-tribal member is, yes, this is devastation from what it was, but it's also succession. This is landscape evolution. This isn't the first fire. This isn't the first debris flow. We have evidence with charcoal and debris flow from past debris flows up in the canyon that occurred thousands of years ago. So it's a cycle that reoccurs, and trying to explain that and show that, yes, there's not a big, healthy, mature conifer forest, but look, we've got 15 to 20 foot aspens everywhere. Deer and elk are just loving it. It's different, but it's also valuable. It's not degradation. So trying to explain that and show that. We try to implement structures to really promote these concepts, and a lot of these structures are simple, they're hand-built, and then we have Reed Whitsley here with Rio Grande Returned. He's a big proponent of these low-tech processes. They're cost-effective, they can be used with the materials you have on site. We took recommendations from Bear and Bar, where these rock dams that we did in the lower canyon, but then we got to these upper tributaries, and it was this pumice and geologic substrate with no rocks. So what do? We were supposed to put rock dams, and we can't. Were we going to helicopter rocks in? Are we going to? No, we're not. So what we did, well, we have unlimited timber supply here. We have completely burned forest. There's wood everywhere. It's falling. How can we use it? And so Reed and Bruce Bauer and some of our forestry staff were really able to go in and innovate and sort of take these prescriptions with rock and convert those to log and look at what do you have on site rather than what was provided that you do. And again, it comes back to that word that Daniel mentioned earlier, key theme, adaptive management. Start with an idea, but maintain flexibility. Be willing to work with the materials you have on site, the budgets you have, the staff you have. I like to use an example of a community in central New Mexico, the community of Ruidoso. They had a fire in town that burned right up to the high school. This little watershed right above a suburban neighborhood. They knew it was high severity fire. They were going to have a monsoon season. In about 3 weeks it was going to start. This fire was in early June, late May. They went in and they said, well, we have county crews, we have parks and rec staff, we have these waffles and hay bales from our ag partners here. What can we do? And started implementing small, low-tech stuff at the very upper reaches of this watershed, right up to the fence of the high school. Ended up that flood came in 2 weeks later, a week ahead of schedule, and those baffles, what do they call them, wattles, the straw tubes you see. Unfortunately, I hate when they line them with plastic, but they make them with biodegradable materials too. Those features captured that sediment in the first 30 yards of that catchment area, and was able to allow that water and sediment to deposit before it even reached the tributary, before it clogged the culvert. So small scale effects, utilizing your local resources in a quick, efficient manner, not even waiting for the bear and bar, but looking at other communities. Those little things can do a lot, and especially immediately after the fire while you're waiting for things to settle. So acknowledge what resources you have and then your natural processes and try and tie into those. Again, develop resilience is a goal. Habitat creation, diversity, complexity. Habitat complexity is a big one. And then connectivity, we're seeing a lot with our wildlife corridors and aquatic connectivity. I'm a big proponent of increasing surface and groundwater storage. Whenever you have these riparian systems, maximize those areas. It really dawned on me this last summer when we had a 5-week drought here in northern New Mexico. It was dry, but as soon as a couple storms started coming in, they didn't hit the valley floors, but you look up in the mountains and they're getting rain up there. They're getting rain almost 3 times as much as this communities down below. That's just all the more reason to maximize those high altitude areas, even if they're at the top of your watersheds. Those are critical in storage and banking your water resources. Tie into your restoration efforts. We do a lot of seedling plantings, aerial seeding in some cases. We're moving away from the landscape effort of trying to plant everything and working now toward more of a nucleation-based approach, finding key sites that have good soil characteristics, high water tables, and focusing on concentrated planting in those areas, preferably at high elevation, so that seeds that can propagate naturally through gravity, but also through wildlife and birds primarily. And then trying to tie into what critters in the system will actually promote these effects. I talked about water storage, like beaver are nature's engineers. They create surface and subsurface water storage and habitat that supports all these other carnivores and critters, from the bugs and macroinvertebrates that feed the fish, to the fish that feed the otter and the mink. And these apex carnivores that we ultimately would like to see introduced back to the watersheds. I put an et cetera because that can extend to wolves, to other creatures, but some of those have more conflictual perspectives. A big thing I want to share, though, is limiting the introduction of foreign materials. That was a cultural priority when we started our FEMA project. Our engineers still gave us giant precast concrete culvert designs, and we ended up having to pay to redesign and get something built out of locally stacked stone. But anytime you can limit foreign materials, I advocate for that, particularly in stream areas. And again, trying to reconnect the people to the land. Indigenous knowledge, definitely worth some time here for folks who are interested in this. Again, you're recognizing those natural processes, and you're working and you're trying to replicate or encourage those processes, whether it be floodplain connectivity, the beaver on the landscape, prescribed fire, invasive species and vegetation management, and again, relying heavily on integrating those locally sourced materials. Also, again, limiting concrete, my favorite thing to avoid. Nature-based solutions, again, maximizing ecosystems. These terms are all synonymous and they overlap in a lot of cases, but again, trying to recognize what's going on in the landscape. Also looking at your variability. Are you dealing with floods or are you dealing with drought? Are you dealing with both? How do we mitigate the floods? But then when we get that water, how do we store it and use it? Finding multi-benefit approaches to projects is just as important as adaptive management. Again, habitat diversity and complexity, that's going to increase your ecological value, your function, and that translates to more fish, to more recreation, to potentially more economic dollars if you're trying to finance or try to use that as an economic revenue source. Santa Clara did rely, as Governor mentioned, on the canyon as their primary economics revenue source up until 2000. They were a non-gaming tribe, but they were forced to look at alternatives, and they started the Santa Clara Development Corporations, which operates and maintains this casino and hotel and bowling center next door. We have a movie theater, a golf course, numerous investments across the community and up at Puya Cliffs, and as well as the canyon again someday. So just because we don't have the canyon as a revenue source now, it doesn't mean we're not looking to bring that back and provide that to the public. Last thing I want to touch on is more on an international or global context. This is an outcome of the UN Climate Conference this past summer in Egypt. Becoming nature positive. We're finally at this paradigm shift where we've understand we're no longer in this post-World War II mentality where we're here to conquer and develop nature, but we're really trying to actually promote it. We have executive orders now at the presidential level to increase the adoption of nature-based solutions. Also executive orders on integrating traditional and indigenous knowledge. These are all tools that we have going in our favor now, and the goal really is how can we become nature positive through our developments rather than just trying to offset small gains.